So as we hit day 5, slope gets, on your note sheet, it gets 2 boxes. There's slope, calculating it, doing it in an equation, things like that, the math part. And then there's the graphing part. Can I graph a line? Can I get slope off the graph of a line? Things like that. So when we get to that part at the end, that's going to be one of your options on what to do. And I've got these little graphs that if you want to, instead of sketching them, I've got like glue sticks and stuff like that up here. You could tape a couple of those on there if you wanted to actually graph some things and have it look that way a little bit. So we've got some options, but we will come back to this a little later. For the time being, we are going to chat some generic things with slope. So we'll do like what we tend to do. We're going to put some of that up here at the top. So slope in and of itself is what we often call in math rise over run, which really just means, hey, how much am I going up or down depending on what sign that number on top of my fraction is, versus run, which is how far or how much am I going to the right or the left, depending if the number on the bottom of my fraction is positive or negative. And so in this first part, that's really all I've got to focus on. I'm going to have a couple of dots. Fortunately for this time, the dots are there for me already. I don't have to go find them myself. Maybe a little later in the packet we'll run into that. But as we're looking at this first group, you can go from one point to the other in either direction. And we're kind of making a bit of a triangle out of this. You know, how many do I go up to get aligned with that? And then how many do I go over? So I notice here I'm going up 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going up 5 positive. And I'm going right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positive, because right is positive. And so my slope would just be 5 over 5, or 1, because 5 divided by 5 is 1, or if you want to leave it a fraction, 1 over 1 is okay. If it's a whole number, though, you can always have the option of leaving it as a whole number. So typically what I'll do when I'm trying to find slope, I usually start on the left, but that's just me. So get even with that one and go over. Color's never a bad idea. So this time I went down 1, 2, 3. And I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But I'm going to the right. Again, direction matters. Now, if I was working on a final, let's say, or a quiz or anything else like that, it was multiple choice, that is not going to be one of the choices. You're like, well, what the heck? Because if I do negative 3 divided by 6, math, enter, enter, this will simplify. If you get a fraction, usually a good idea to do math, enter, enter to make sure it's in its simplest form. Other than that, we're set. Okay? So we're just doing slope visually in the first part. When we get to the second part, now we've got points. So now we've got our formula, which again I would make sure when we get to talking about that is on my note sheet. But there's my form for slope when I'm doing these. And it's never a bad idea to label your points just to make sure we get them both in there and we don't forget about any of the parts. So I get in here, and I'm like, okay, so y2 minus y1, and yes, the minus is part of the equation, the negative is part of my 4. And then x2 minus x1. If sometimes you forget that minus and negative makes it plus, it never hurts to put it in the calculator, which will help remind us. If I owe my friend $19 and I borrow 2 more, I've borrowed 21. And since it's a fraction, since it's not a whole number, math, enter, enter, tells us that negative 2/3 is the most simplified. Now again, if this was the short answer part of the final and you didn't have choices and you left me that, you're going to get a majority of the points. You showed me that you put things in the right places. But if you want every single point, we got to get that last part done. Okay, let's go up a little more here. Okay, find the slope of a line parallel to the given line. What do we know about the slope of a parallel line? Yeah, it's going to be the same slope. You're like, okay, but what does that mean? That means when I'm looking at my equation that's in y equals form, the number in front of x is the value that I need, is the value that I'm looking for. So I just find the number in front of x, and that's the answer. Simple as that. Now it's a little different when I'm having to make the equation and do some stuff, but for now, we're just reminding ourselves what parallel means. And it means just steal the number in front of x so we can get to that next part. A little chunkier of a review on this one today because there's a little more to look at. Okay, now this one, a little more interesting. Find the slope perpendicular to the line. Okay, what do you got? Okay. Close. Reciprocal. We're going to flip the fraction. And if we want to simplify the language a little bit, we can say change the sign, but you're right. It basically is an opposite or a negative reciprocal if we want to use math language with this. We're still going to find the slope original that we're looking for in front of the x, just like we did before. But what we'll do then, so like let's say we were doing 12, so there's my original slope. If I want to parallel, that would be the answer, but it's not. So I'm going to take the fraction, I'm going to flip it over, so 1 over 3 becomes 3 over 1, and since it was negative, this one just becomes positive. Yeah, and 3. Yeah, you could just write plain 3, even if you didn't put 3 over 1. That'd be fine. Yeah, if you just said it was 3, that's good. So if we do 14, let's say, yeah, what number's in front of x if I don't see 1? 1. So you're like, okay, if something's not a fraction, I can make it a fraction by putting it over 1. Not x, but you're like, well, Hardy, if I flip 1 divided by 1, it's still 1 divided by 1. That's true. But then it was positive before, but now we're changing the sign. So having the answer either of these ways would absolutely work. So it's kind of interesting to see. But yeah, we're just flipping the fraction over. Again, if it wasn't a fraction originally, make it 1. Then flip it and change the sign. So yeah, perpendicular, we got to think a little more than we did with parallel, but still nothing too bad. So if we were doing 15, okay, let's see. Flip this, 1 over 4. Before it was negative, so now it's positive. So I'll say one more thing about 15 before we go any further, because I'll have some people say, well, wait a minute. The 4 was negative, but the 1 was positive, so do I put a negative on the 1 and a positive on the 4? No. Whatever sign's in front, that's the sign for your whole fraction. So if it was negative at the start, this becomes positive. If this was positive at the start, your answer is going to be negative. And it'll just be one or the other. It's not going to be bits and pieces. So now, we've done some of the math. Now we're going to take a peek at how do we get equations? So reminder, m is your slope. We've just seen that in the last 2 sections. Whatever number's in front of x is my slope. B is my y-intercept. So it's stressing the y part, the y-intercept. So when I go looking at these lines to make my equation, my first job is to look on the y-axis to see where my line crosses. Whatever the y value is at that point, well, between 0 and 2 we got 1. That's my B. Now, wasn't quite as nice on this part and didn't give you that second point to be able to find slope. So as we're walking down this, again, we're looking for where it goes through one of the intersections. But it's got to go right through the middle. And that took a while. So there's one where it goes through the middle still. And then we're going to do what we did when we were calculating slope before. We said, how far to get from one to the other? Do I go down and over? Well, I go down to, and I went right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I've got my slope. Any line that goes down to the right is going to be negative. And now I just plug the values in. M is negative 2 over 5. Don't lose your x. Plus B. Find that first point on y, count between the 2 dots. Let's do this. I will do this. I'm not going to do a bunch of them in the section, but let's at least get our dots found so we can make sure that everybody, so that everybody's got the same couple of dots that they're working with here. Because it's much easier to do slope when you know where the 2 dots are and you're not going, not sure if that one really goes through or not. Does it go here? Does it go there? So that way, at least, if we've got those, we're for sure going to all count to the same spot. So when you're given a graph, finding your slope and your y-intercept is one way to do the equation. Another way to do the equation, which is simpler, oh, am I going to squeeze that in? Close, okay. Let's say we're doing 21. Write the slope-intercept form of the equation given the slope and the y-intercept. So I'm already being given both the values I need. I don't have to calculate anything. I just got to write y equals m, my slope, x, don't lose your x, plus b. Okay, no extra math. Just insert the values and go about your business. So we're not trying to make this overly complex. We're just trying to work it out as best we can. Oh, what do we got left? Okay. Here we got to bust out a little algebra for the first time. Write the slope-intercept form of the equation, okay? So in other words, my job is to get y alone. Well, y is not alone in any of these. Yeah, because here, if I want to get y alone, I would. That 5x is positive. I want to undo it. But here's the one thing I would suggest to make life simpler. When you go to write your terms on the right side, notice the x part is first after the equals. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the x part first after the equals. But I'm not quite set because y is almost alone, but not quite. What's that last step to get y alone? How do I undo this 4? What's the opposite of multiply?
Divide.
Okay. Now, you're like, why are you doing it to every single part? Because I need to get it into y equals. Okay? I would want to be able to graph this. So if I get to this next part, and I'm like, okay, so negative 5 divided by 4. Negative 5 divided by 4 is a decimal. We're not doing decimals. So it said, okay, keep that as negative 5 over 4x. And then negative 24 divided by 4 is negative 6. And y is by itself. So sometimes you may have to do a couple of steps. Sometimes you may only have to do one, and y will be alone, and that'll be nice. And that's what we hope for. But what if nasty stuff comes up? Yeah, like number 27. That's a good place to go. So I look at this and I'm like, okay, there's parentheses, so I gotta distribute. So we'll do that. You're like, ew. Okay, let's see here. Negative 1/4 times negative 3. We don't do decimals. Math, enter, enter. Positive 3/4. Yuck. Okay, Hardy, so what in the heck are we going to do here? So here's the good news. The good news is we have a calculator that will take care of this. I'm not going to multiply through by 4 because that's going to make it 3 steps. I only want to do 1. So what's my one step to get y alone? How do I undo this? Add. No worries on this fraction that's coming. We got this under control. So what are we going to do? We're going to go to the calculator. Because I forgot to grab one of the new ones before we started. So positive 3/4 in parentheses plus 4. We don't do decimals. Math, enter, enter. Which says the answer will be 19 over 4. Hi. I have Tegan next hour. Third hour I have her. Yep. Uh-huh. And that's the route we're going to go. So again, you're just going to type in the fraction in parentheses, add it, and then do math, enter to get back to this. Or if it was multiple choice and you had a decimal, just type the fraction until you find the decimal that matches. But that's how we're going to deal with that. But that's as bad as it would get. Most of the time, we're not going to be dealing with the fractions anyway, so it wouldn't be too bad. Oh, we're getting there. Write the slope-intercept form of the equation of the line through the given point with the given slope. Okay, we have to have a little help this time. Slope-intercept form is going to be step 2. Like step 2, that's what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, step 1 is point-slope form. You can see now why we've got 2 boxes for this stuff on the note sheet. So step 1 is going to be plugging in to point slope. But here's the good news. I already have x1, y1, and m. I already have the 3 points I need. I don't have to calculate anything. I don't have to find anything. All I have to do is start plugging these values in. So y minus, because I don't plug into the regular y, y1 is -1 equals m x minus x1, which is 4. Here's one thing I want to help clean up, because in the last quiz, this was probably the most missed thing, and I want to make sure we fix it. What happens when you minus a negative? Okay, this becomes plus a positive. Double negative makes a plus. It's like you take the second negative and you turn it sideways, and it makes the plus for you. The reason I wanted to stress that was, momentarily here, after we get rid of the parentheses by distributing, by multiplying that 2 through, this is y plus 1. My last step to get slope-intercept form is to get y by itself. And if I'd have left it this way, I'd have been tempted to put plus 1, because I saw the -1. But I got to do the opposite. And get to my answer. I got to peek at one thing just a minute here. Okay. So even if you run into crazy like you do with 31 with a fractional slope, the process is going to be the same. Follow your point slope, y minus y1 equals your slope x minus x1, which is 2. We'll see. When I distribute, and I'll kind of pause after this, again, multiplying fractions can get a little complex at times. So again, put your fraction in parentheses. We're just using the divide button, 2 divided by 3. And multiplying that by -2, but I get a decimal. We don't want a decimal. Math, enter. Fractions aren't going to get us. We did it in 27. We're going to do it again here. Goal is to get y alone. Do that opposite. Showing all the steps so we get partial credit even if something goes wrong. Again, -4 divided by 3. No fancy fraction button. Minus 1. Oh, decimals. I'm getting tired of decimals. Math. Right below that green alpha key. Enter, enter. Hardy, are you going to be obnoxious and put a fractional thing like this on the final? So, again, just pondering through. And again, why I'm giving the workday Friday, because I know there's a lot of this that we've been doing, especially with slope stuff. You're like, holy cow, Hardy, it never ends. I know, this was like the longest unit in the history of mankind. So, last pieces of the puzzle to play. Write the slope-intercept form of the line described. Same as the last section. Except, now, instead of being given the slope, this is the only part I'm going to show. Whoops, sorry about that. You're going to go, it says parallel so I'm just stealing the number straight from the equation. Nothing else is different. You're still being given x1 and y1. But you're being given the slope in a different way. Even when it changes to perpendicular, for my slope, you flip the fraction. Well, again, 1 over 1 isn't really going to change much, but change the sign. So point slope form into slope intercept is what the goal is here. The only difference is going to be how am I getting that slope value when I'm trying to work through it. And I think the final thing, and you're like, holy cow, Hardy, again, longest thing ever. Well, it's the last one, so it's going to be the last big Hardy gibbering session you got to deal with. Last part, okay? This is where we get to put it all together. Slope-intercept form. It's going to be our last step. Oh, my goodness. So basically what we're going to do here, it's going to be like the last two sections with one exception. Instead of you being given the slope, and then you're just plugging numbers in right away here, instead, we've got to find the slope first. Label my points. y2 minus y1. Again, you'll have all these forms on your note sheet, and even I think a couple of them on the final. And x2 minus x1. Minus a negative becomes plus. So 1 plus 5 is 6. 3 minus 2 is 1. So you've got your m. You've got your x1, y1, and now we're ready to roll through. Actually, I will help finish this one off. And I just start following. Y minus y1 equals m x minus x1. And similar to what we did before we multiply the 6, we distribute the 6 to both parts. And the lone goal now is to get y alone. Show those steps so you get points for the things that you do right. Hoofda! We survived.